Kia ora, good evening and welcome to the Huddy Hui, our 68th episode. And our guest tonight needs no introduction. He's one of the best referees in world rugby. He's one of New Zealand's professional referees, and he's just come off the back of an enthralling test match between Australia and the Springboks. Our guest tonight is Dr. Ben O'Keefe. Ben, many thanks for coming on the Hui. Just recently, you refereed that stunning test match at the new Allianz Stadium in Sydney. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, thanks, Brad, and thanks for the kind introduction. It's good to be on the show again. It's been awesome. Last few weeks, obviously being in Sydney 2 weeks ago at the new stadium, Allianz. They've got a really big sports hub there now, where I think they've got Rugby Australia, NRL Australia, all sort of in one precinct. In that new 52,000 seat stadium is just incredible. You can sort of walk into it from Paddington, and we had a good night, and it was full of probably equal Australian and Springbok supporters. So it made for a wicked atmosphere. Enjoyed the game. They're always tough games between Australia and the Springboks. There's no love lost between those two teams, and I think this year with the Rugby Championship, the fact that they're playing each other like the All Blacks are, so 1 week and then the next week they're playing the same team again. All the baggage from the week before gets carried into the second game, so we certainly had a lot of that in the game in Sydney.
Oh, particularly the game in Sydney after Adelaide. Rather interesting decision in that Adelaide test. You were the assistant referee for that game, and Paul Williams was definitely had a fire experience in that first test.
Yeah, I mean, that's test match rugby. That's why they call them a test match. They test not just the players, but also the match official team, referees, assistant referees, and the TMO. So I think all year we've seen difficult situations or difficult decisions, and the team of four now has to decide, okay, what's going to be the best decision for this game in the moment. We saw that in July in the New Zealand vs Ireland series. We saw that in Australia vs England series as well, and that they never change. And Rugby Championship, I feel is another step up. It's similar to Six Nations. It's second only to probably the Rugby World Cup, and I think, second only to that really, the Six Nations and Rugby Championship. And I guess given that we're only a year out from the Rugby World Cup, all these games are just super tight. So all the decisions that we make are under the microscope.
And of course, last year actually, you took charge of the second test between the British and Irish Lions and the Springboks. And in the build up to that second test, there was a lot of tension going into that second test after the first one. How did you deal with that pressure? Because it's definitely a challenging environment in the Lions series.
Yeah, Lions, we talk about pinnacle events, Rugby World Cup, like Lions, for a British and Irish Lions referee who won't be able to get referee those games. It's a pretty massive game and a massive series to be involved in. I was fortunate enough to be selected for that one in South Africa, and I think what we're seeing now is that there's a lot more media, a lot more opinions after the games, and obviously there's a lot more pressure that's been put on the team of four and the referee that's in the middle. So it wasn't unexpected that there was going to be a lot of pressure on us after the first game. I think both the winning and the losing team was going to be able to do that, and that's part of the dynamics and the team tactics leading into the second test and the third test as well. If it was even, so it was one of those things where like any game, especially World Cups and especially Lions series, what I do is I try and prepare for all the variables that can happen in the game. So I feel like I can control my decision making, so the blueprint that I referee by. But I also like to look at previous Lions series, previous Rugby World Cups, and what were decisions in the game and those sorts of games and in those environments that I can learn from, that other referees maybe handled differently or made errors or would have done something differently afterwards. So I went into that game and that series well prepared, but obviously nothing could have prepared me for what happened. It was so unexpected with everything that happened with the video that was released, and then the criticism that came on us as a team of four. So I think the fact that I had a really good base of preparation in terms of my game, in terms of what I expected going into the match, I was able to be really adaptable that week. And a lot of it was around just getting around the team, making sure that we had confidence and that we could go into the game knowing that we could do a really good job. Because when there's a lot of external pressures, a lot of external distractions, you got to find a way to be able to get your head clear and go out into a cauldron of what was that second test and referee well. And I think we did a good job there, but yeah, it wasn't easy.
Well, exactly. And of course, what made it also tougher for you as well was because it was in the midst of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and traveling around the world at that time, heavily restricted. And that probably made your preparations harder as well, being a test referee.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of when you referee a game, like we just talked about LNZ Stadium, 52,000 people. The players love it. I love it. The atmosphere in the stadiums I've been to around the world, Twickenham, Murrayfield, I think of big stadiums in Australia, like I mentioned, but also South Africa and even Eden Park here in Auckland. When those stadiums are full, that's what I love about rugby. I love that people are coming, they're watching, they're entertained by it. You can sort of ride their enthusiasm, the highs and the lows of them supporting their team. So that's a really big part of the game of rugby and why I love it. Just the passion that supporters have. So when you take that away with COVID, and you don't have that in the stadium, it actually makes it a lot more difficult as a referee to be able to referee that game. I think it also makes it more difficult for the players because I was going into one of the biggest series I've ever been involved in, a Lion series. I was fortunate enough to be around the one that was in New Zealand, and the British and Irish Lions supporters, when they came, they just create an atmosphere. They sing songs, and that really adds to the occasion. I think it lifts players, and I think it lifts referees as well. So we were walking into this series thinking that in South Africa that would have been huge, having touring fans and local spectators being at the game. But we're at Cape Town Stadium, and we got the bus in, with a police escort, but there was no one really to escort us past because there was no one at the ground, and that was actually quite dangerous for us as referees because fortunately I was able to do some Super Rugby games, which didn't have a crowd. And what I learned in those occasions, which really helped me in the British and Irish Lions games, is that when you turn up for these matches and you don't have the crowd there building up that atmosphere and building up that tension, it actually stops you from sort of rising and getting in the zone and fine tuning and sharpening your mental skills, leading into that match and in the warm up as well. So you feel a little bit flat. And so I remember that first time when I was down in Dunedin doing a Highlanders game, I had to really remind myself that this is a Super Rugby game. This is a really important game, and you need to actually stay sharp and be focused. And I just realized that you get a lot of that out of the crowd in your warm up when you're looking around and you're feeling them get excited about a game. And the same thing happened, and fortunately I'd already experienced it, but the same thing was happening. I was warming up and I saw the Springboks warming up. I saw the British and Irish Lions warming up in the same field. And I said to myself, I said, look, you have to really start focusing and take the learnings from that previous game, because that you're not going to be able to do that and rely on the crowd yourself. So you have to find other ways. And I think in the game as well, you do, not that you're never influenced by the crowd. You're never influenced by captains or players, despite how much they probably protest. But you do subconsciously in the back of your mind, if there is a bit of foul play or there is a potential flat pass that might be forward, the reaction of the crowd, I think subconsciously, helps you with your decision making. It helps you go, oh, okay, I think we may need to check that. Or I'm not 100% on that pass. So maybe if my AI hasn't called anything, I actually need to quickly watch the replay as that try has been scored. After the try has been scored and as the kick is making conversion. So there are a lot of things that you use the crowd for, which I didn't realize until you took the crowd away. And so that was something that I had to prepare for that Lions test. So there are a number of layers that really we had to deal with in that series, which didn't make it any easier than as tough as it already was.
Yeah, and you mentioned the mindset without having a crowd. What's it like when you have a full house, and particularly when you're refereeing in some of the big stadiums around the world? How do you manage something like that, like particularly something like Twickenham?
Yeah, I think Twickenham must be about 70 or 80,000 people, maybe even more. And it's probably one of the biggest stadiums I refereed at. I know that some of the big stadiums in South Africa, they hold quite a lot as well. But every stadium's a little bit different, so it doesn't, like seating capacity wise, there are some big stadiums, but a lot of test matches in Japan when I refereed at the World Cup, because they're full and the size of them, they're created to actually put the atmosphere and put the crowd and the voice into the center of the pitch. So, you really feel, it's really thick. You can feel a lot of it. So the thing is, though, that in the warm-up, you sort of take it all in the anthems, you take it all in, you look around and you hear the singing. But as soon as you blow that whistle, you're just so much in the zone of the tackle that's in front of you, the tackler rolling away, making sure there's a clear release, the jackal on the ball, making sure there's a clear lift. And you go from that tackle to the next tackle to the next tackle to the scrum to the line-out, that I guess you zone out from that atmosphere. There are very few times in a game where, you do take a moment or, I guess the crowd probably only once has ever broken through my attention. And that was, I refereed a Six Nations game at Twickenham, and I think Johnny May he made a break down the sideline, and I think England were well ahead by the stage, and the crowd just erupted and roared, and that caught my attention, which was pretty amazing as I was sort of running down toward the try. But other than that, you're just in that moment and in that zone the whole time. That for the 80 minutes, you don't notice it until you sort of blow the final whistle again, and then you walk off.
Let's wind back the clock. Your rugby journey, I believe it started all the way back down in Melbourne. Tell us about how rugby all started for you.
Yeah, well, look, rugby started like a lot of New Zealand boys, were dreaming of being an All Black. I actually started with the round ball, playing for Redwood Rockets. So played soccer with my brother, and then moved to rugby and played for Marlborough and Marlborough age grade, and then Marlborough Boys College. And I was sort of a second five centre, and then moved to fullback and moved out to the wing. I was quite tall, so I could run it pretty straight. The first five. My first five was Matt Murphy, and often do a little card or a short ball to me, and I'd be able to crash through. So that's sort of what I was used for a long time, and then got sort of pushed further out towards the wing and towards fullback. And I continued to play. And my dad actually refereed a lot in Marlborough, so he refereed Premier Rugby, and then got to do some first class games as well. So I would do I'd run around and play rugby in the morning, and then sort of watch Dad referee or watch the games that he was involved in the afternoon with my Polar chips and can of Coke down at Lansdowne Park. And I never watched him. I was just watching Dad, being part of rugby. I never watched him as a referee, thinking one day I'd do that, because again, I still wanted to be an All Black. But I wasn't. So then I moved down to Dunedin for university. And that's when I sort of, decided to give refereeing a go. I sort of fell out of love, or wasn't good enough to play anymore. And he was the one that mentioned, look, you should start referring. And sort of, we're talking about 19 years now, and it's about the time when traditionally, I think people that started refereeing, it was when you retired, when you're a little bit older, or you got injured, you started referring. Whereas nowadays, and when I first started, it was a bit of a pathway there for younger referees who had experience playing or even younger to get into refereeing, because they needed referees to referee obviously their club rugby, they needed referees to referee Heartland, NPC, and then there was a pathway towards professional rugby in terms of Super Rugby and Test matches. So it really just started down there, but it started for me just as something to do in the weekend to stay involved in rugby. And it was, 3 or 4 years until, people started knocking my door, and I started getting sort of regional rep games, and then went higher up. So for me, it was great, because it got me out of the study, it got me out of the hospital wards, and it allowed me to stay part of the game, to run around and keep mentally fit. And I just enjoyed it. I just enjoyed being involved in games. I enjoyed the trying to every week get better, to be able to referee the game better for the players and for the teams. And I think Dunedin offered a really good opportunity for that, because in Dunedin, a lot of people, they go to Dunedin, they study, and potentially 3 to 4 years, there's always that cycle, there's always that turnover. So that sort of top echelon of referees often turned over quite quickly, compared to maybe Auckland or Wellington, where people are sort of settling down there a bit more frequently and calling it their homes, and you probably have a long-term senior referee there for maybe 5-10 years plus. So it meant that I could referee and get experience at that top level quite quickly. And I think that really sort of helped jettison my career in refereeing, because I was able to referee that top club rugby, which in Dunedin was of quite a high level. And it sort of helped me with my pictures and my game, which is really good.
And you mentioned your studies of medicine there. I believe that as well as being a professional referee, you continue on in your profession in the medical side of things. Tell us about it. You're an eye doctor.
Yeah. So I studied medicine down in Dunedin, and so it's a 6-year degree, and I did 5 years down there, and then my last year up in Wellington. That's sort of how I found myself up refereeing for the Wellington referees. And yeah, it was something that I always wanted to do. I don't have my granddad was a doctor, but there's no stream of Dr. O'Keefe's in the family. So when I found out that he actually did medicine, it was quite good. It didn't seem like so much of a fluke. So I did my years down there and refereed on the side as well. And once you graduate and you start doing more clinical work, and I quickly realised that I really liked surgery rather than medicine. So fixing things, the hands-on. If someone came in and they'd broken a bone or cut a tendon, you can fix that, and then come back and see me in a week, and we'll see how it's going. I really enjoyed that side of things, and that was a big part for me of moving into eye medicine, because you don't really do a lot of eyes when you're studying medicine. In the 6 years, you sort of do a bit of everything. Obviously, the human body is pretty complicated, so to try and fit all of what can go wrong in a 6-year degree is pretty difficult. So you get a little taste of everything, and you get about 1 week in 6 years of eyes. So I didn't really have much of experience in it. But I came across a friend, and I came across a postgraduate degree in ophthalmology, which is eye medicine, and I tried it, and I really liked the theory. So I thought, oh, this could be something quite cool, because it's kind of like a good balance between the medicine but also surgery, like some of the surgeries that you can do, within the eye, to help people see and to help them improve their vision and quality of life is amazing. You can cataract operations, but even just simple things like helping them with an infection or inflammation they have in their eye. They can come back a few weeks later and they're back to normal. And generally it's a specialty where they can come into the outpatient clinic and they can talk to you that they're pretty healthy, but there's something wrong with your eye, so they can actually have a good yarn, which I quite like as well, versus some of the other specialties where unfortunately people are unwell and they're in bed, and it can be a pretty tough place. So I got a job doing ophthalmology in Wellington and just absolutely fell in love with it. You're thrown in the deep end like straight away. You're chucked right into clinics, and you have to use you throw your stethoscope away because you don't really need to use that. And you use a slit lamp, which is a microscope. So you have to use this microscope. And if anyone's been to, an eye doctor or an optometrist, that's our bread and butter. So, we use that to look, all the way from the front to the back of the eye. You don't get taught a lot about that. So really on day one, you're learning as you're going. So it was challenging, but I really, really enjoyed it. And it's something that I've always done since then. And I did it full time as I was refereeing. And as I started to do more games in NPC and Super Rugby and started traveling overseas, it got to a point where I was trying to juggle both full time. Clinics Monday to Friday fly out to a game, referee Saturday, fly back Sunday, and then back in the clinic Monday to Friday, as well as trying to train and do reviews. It got pretty intense, got pretty busy for about 2 years. And I was fortunate that at the time I was at a level where New Zealand Rugby actually wanted to offer me a full-time contract. And I had a really good mentor called Jonathan White, and he was a referee in Auckland and a cardiologist. He's now an interventional cardiologist in Auckland, and he was great because he sort of showed that there was a pathway for anyone with another job, but in my situation, for doctors to be able to do rugby. And he was an excellent referee, so I think that helped. That helped as well. And he decided to sort of continue refereeing, but really went down the medical pathway. And I thought, well, look, I'm going to get off this contract. Let's just try it for a year and see how it goes. And I'll go a little bit more down the rugby pathway and then come back to medicine after rugby's over. Because as we know, rugby can be pretty political. It can be pretty cutthroat. It can be pretty intense. But fortunately, I've been doing it for 7 or 8 years now, and what's really worked out quite nicely is the flexibility that whilst I do rugby full time and I'll be away for maybe 200 days of the year. I'll probably go away for 4 or 5 week blocks, maybe 4 times a year. Whenever I'm home, I can call up the hospital and email my nurse manager and say, look, I'm available, and they love having the extra hand around. So it's kind of win-win for both of us. I get to go and keep my experience up and also get a break from rugby. And they get the extra sort of pair of hands to help out with the clinics, which can be pretty busy. So I've been really fortunate with how that's all worked out.
200 days is the average and often the case for a referee at the professional level, and it can be a pretty lonely place at times. How do you keep yourself busy, particularly when you're on the road?
Yeah, it can be pretty lonely. Like I think I'm a pretty independent guy. Like I don't mind traveling by myself. I love traveling. I love seeing the world and cities. So I can often just get lost and be walking in the city and getting to know the place, which is pretty good. And I think fortunately now I've been traveling so much that, you do get looked after by the local referees quite well. It's the same when, referees come to Wellington, they get looked after pretty well, which is great. And so now I've built up, quite a good network of friends around the world. So look, often when I'm traveling, if I'm traveling by myself, but I can be traveling with up to maybe 2 or 3 others, the assistant referees and TMOs. We'll either be hanging out, or I'll be catching up with friends or family overseas. Obviously, we've got to train and do our preparation for the game. I take my golf club, so I always try and play around a golf overseas. I think that's another cool way of seeing the world because you go to a place outside, and it's somewhere where you probably would never have travelled as a tourist. So that's quite cool too. And then again, you meet new people. So that's sort of what I do. Around the rigors of preparing for a big test match and reviewing big test matches. So I'm quite lucky that I've got into a routine and a good rhythm around it.
What was your first provincial game in the New Zealand squad?
My first provincial game, I think it would have been Heartland Rugby. I refereed about a handful of Heartland games. I remember it was in West Coast. So it was West Coast, and I think it was Wairarapa Bush. I could be wrong there, but it was definitely West Coast because I remember actually because it was my first game. It was a crazy storm that weekend, and so there was a game on beforehand, and there was a massive hailstorm that happened. And actually, I remember seeing the referee of that game huddling under the players as they sort of exited the field. And I got a phone call or a message from New Zealand Rugby, and they said, "Look, we might have to cancel this game. There's a serious risk to players, and there's a bit of a weather warning." And I remember looking at my phone, I was like, "Ain't no way I'm cancelling this game," and because I guess we're responsible for that. But fortunately, like literally 5 minutes before kickoff, the sun came out. It shone for 80 minutes. I refereed the game. It was my first game, and then it bucketed down straight afterwards. So that was my first game. It almost didn't go ahead, but we got it underway with a bit of luck.
Divine intervention indeed. And of course, your first Super Rugby game, of course, that you took charge of came in quite unique circumstances. And of course, you got the Battle of the South, the Highlanders versus the Crusaders at Forsyth Bar.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think back. Like, I grew up in Blenheim, so, Southland or South Island born, the Crusaders versus the Highlanders was a massive South Island derby. And so what was planned is that year I was meant to referee. My first game was the Highlanders versus the Hurricanes in Dunedin, and that was going to be week 4. So what they do is you're always the assistant referee in the lead up. So the year before I was an assistant referee, so getting used to the experience and getting a bit closer to the games. And so week 4 I was meant to be refereeing, and then week 3 and week 2 I was refereeing the development versions of those teams. So week 2 I was refereeing the Crusader Knights versus the Highlander development team, leading into my first game. So my whole year was building up to week 4. And so I was running touch for Chris Pollock in round 1. So, Crusaders versus the Highlanders, and all I was thinking about was my game in a few weeks. And, normally we do a little bit of activation, a bit of gym work on the morning of the game, like players do. This morning I was in another room to Polly, and he actually messaged me. He said, "Look, you need to get in to see me." I thought it was a little bit funny because, I was going to see him in a few minutes anyway. But the reason that he couldn't come to see me is that when I walked into the room, I could see the size of his ankle from where I was standing in the doorway. And so he'd rolled his ankle. And I just immediately thought, okay, we better get you to ED, we better get an X-ray, see if it's broken, see how bad it is. So we did all that. And this is about 9 in, and the game was at 7 p.m. at night. We got to about 1 o'clock. And then I sort of realized, I knew that, okay, well, obviously you're not refereeing tonight. And, I was smiling and, I just thought, wow, that's pretty crazy, mate, unlucky. But it didn't dawn on me that, well, it would be me then that would have to cover him because I was AR1, so every game has a referee AR1, AR2, and then everyone goes up in order, if someone falls over. And so I got a phone call, I think, from Lyndon Bray, and he said, "Yep, you're up, enjoy." And I didn't even realize that that could even happen. So it kind of smacked me in the face, really. And so I realized that, okay, I had about 5 hours to prepare for, the biggest game of my life up until that moment. And for me, I was very technical and I did a lot of work before a game. It was like I was studying for an exam every day. I'd have 7 days leading into a Saturday. I'd be I'd be working every day on specific things to actually get right for that game and get in the right space. So obviously I had 5 hours. I didn't have that time frame. So I had to really ask myself, okay, what is important for me to be able to referee well tonight? What do I need to do? And I love a game day nap. So what I did was I went straight back to the hotel. I slept for about 3 hours, woke up, and then just went out and refereed. That was all I could do. I didn't bother about it, and there was no point in trying to go through scrums, lineouts of both teams. It was just going to be, I was just going to be, I guess, cramming, and it wasn't just going to help me in that match. So refereed the game, awesome derby. I think, obviously guys like Richie McCall were playing. It was just incredible. And I remember walking off the stadium, chest was out, and just thought this was absolutely outstanding. And thought I nailed it. I thought I did an awesome job. Super Rugby's easy. But about 20 minutes later, the sighting commissioner came in, and there was 7 sightings from the game. So for those people that don't know about sightings, so sightings are really, basically 7 decisions that the referee should have dealt with that are, bad foul play. So should have been a yellow card, or actually was more likely should have been a red card. So I was quickly brought back down to earth quite quickly after that, and then you had to deal with all that. So that was my introduction to Super Rugby. And then, funnily enough, the next weekend I refereed the 2 development teams, and then did my second game, which should have been my debut in week 4. So yeah, it was a good funny start to my career. So I owe Chris Pollock's left ankle for that.
Now, of course, you mentioned the sighting commissioner and all that stuff, but in the last few years, World Rugby's put a tougher emphasis on safety, particularly dangerous tackles. Do you think that that there's too much of an emphasis on the referees getting it right?
Yeah, look, I think the referees that we implement what World Rugby is asking for us to do. So I do think that, like anything, when things are new and they're brought into any type of environment, into a workplace, and the rugby field's no different. There's times that it takes a bit of time for things to actually work out and progress. So when people are sitting in a room and deciding on this head contact process, theoretically it sounds fine and sounds good. But it's not actually until you practically try it in the weekend, you work out, okay, small adjustments that need to be made. And so that's what we've been going through over the last, I guess, 6 months, where, we've got a really good head contact process, or, a tackle framework that's used to make sure that players' techniques are better, so that we lead to better safety in the game. Obviously, there's a massive emphasis on people with head contacts and, concussion and, just trying to look after players and their health in the future. So I think, what World Rugby is doing is really good, and it's just taking a little bit of time to just adjust for us. And what I'm glad is that we're doing this now. We're still a year out from the World Cup, and while we saw some differences in the July series with the All Blacks and Ireland, those adjustments are being made so that by the time we get to the World Cup, we're going to be really humming. We're going to have that real nice balance between making sure that we're allowing a spectacle and also making sure that players are safe as well. So look, I think while we do go through those adjustments, it's quite natural that people blame, I guess, if they think that the decision was wrong, they blame the referees. But referees, yes, we do make mistakes, but also what we're doing is we're just trying to implement what we're being told, and try and make the game safer for the players as well. So that's what I always remind people when they ask us, or they sort of blame us for giving a red card or giving a yellow card when they think it should have been play on.
Super Rugby the last few years has gone through a raft of changes, particularly with South Africa no longer part of it. Can Super Rugby survive?
Yeah, look, I think as long as we have some of the best players in the world, which I think New Zealand definitely does, I think Australia has shown that they definitely do as well. We're going to have a really competitive rugby competition. So, and of course, so we've got those 2 powerhouses. Yes, it was a loss to have South Africa leave, but I think it's just given us an opportunity to create some change and actually go into a direction where we can actually look to, I guess, own or control the competition a little bit more in terms of the New Zealand and Australian stakeholders, so referees, coaches, players, but also there's potentially an avenue for, as we've seen last year, induct the Fijian Drua, the Minor Pacifica, and maybe even get teams from America or Japan involved as well. So I think it's really great. Yes, Super Rugby will continue. I think it's one of the best competitions in the world. It's high octane, it's fast paced. There's many tries. People love watching it, and I think it's an opportunity that we're going to see it grow, and we're going to see the product get better over the next few years with the changes that we were forced into.
Your Test debut was Samoa versus Georgia, and that finished in quite unique circumstances as well.
Yeah, well, like one thing is that coaches always say that a draw is like kissing your sister. So, as a referee in the refereeing world as well, like everyone sort of turns an eyebrow up when a referee sort of finishes a game on a draw, and they always say, "Well, couldn't you have found a penalty in the last minute to find a winner?" But yeah, look, it just did, and it was a really good game over in Samoa. Obviously, Georgia were over there. They're both big packs, big players. They don't like to step down to any sort of physicality. And it was just one of those games that was just so tight. And to be fair, a draw was probably the fair outcome on the day. The two teams just couldn't be separated in that match. So it was interesting. I don't think I've had any other draws since then. Maybe another one. But certainly I've had a lot of close games in Test matches. I seem to sort of get plagued by tight Test matches that go down to the last sort of 5 minutes. So they're great because they always keep you on your toes.
Never had a 0-0 draw before, Ben?
No, fortunately. I don't know. Maybe the lowest score I've ever had was like a 12-9 or something. But certainly no. I mean, obviously refereeing in Super Rugby, you get a lot of tries scored, and even Six Nations games, which can be a little bit tighter. I think teams now, they're just so good at scoring, whether it's on the wing or from line out to maul, that they generally can get through the defenses somehow. So. Touch wood. I haven't had a 0. I couldn't imagine going through a game like that. That'd be pretty tough.
Well, I've done 2.
Oh, good.
2. They're bizarre feelings. Rugby World Cup 2019. Oh, sorry. Rugby World Cup 2019. You were the youngest referee selected at the tournament, and you had a pretty successful tournament. You got to run touch for the final. Tell us about the tournament in Japan.
Oh, look, it was one of those experiences that, look, I never thought I'd ever referee at a World Cup, and it wasn't probably until 2 years out from the World Cup when, I started doing Test matches, started getting into a position where I thought, well, I could be selected here. And so when I got called by Alain Roland to say that I was selected, it was amazing. It was like a really, really amazing achievement for me, and I was really proud of all the work that I put in to be able to get to that. But then once you get selected, you realise, okay, well, it's not over. You got to referee well at that World Cup, and I think the whole experience was new for me. I didn't, I'd obviously watched World Cups. I'd been around World Cup referees before, and really admired them, and thought they were pretty special people, and the experiences they obviously got from those World Cups were very unique, and they'd use those experiences to be sort of the top referees that they are now. So I was really looking forward to getting those experiences for those reasons, and. Being in Japan, I think was very unique as well, because it was a nation that absolutely while rugby is not the number one sport, they absolutely got behind it, and it was incredible. There was just support for every team at every game. The Japanese public got out in numbers and supported the tournament so well. And we were in an environment where we were a part of the biggest game in the world, and it was actually it was a 9-week tournament. And we were engrossed in rugby and engrossed in our teams for that whole time. So it was incredible. And I did 3 games. I started off with Australia, Fiji, then France, USA, and then got to referee the home nation, Japan versus Scotland, and sort of what was the final game, but the winner of that game went through to the quarterfinals. So it was just incredible. And there was a lot of learnings there. There was a lot of obviously pressure in the games, different that I've ever experienced before. There's a lot of media attention around the high tackle framework, the head contact process. World Rugby came out and sort of criticised their referees as well. So that was something new that we weren't really used to. But yeah, there was just an immense, like you really felt like the world was watching. So that was the experience there. And then luckily, I was in a position where they selected me to run touch in the quarters, the semis, and then the final. So I got to experience the final with England versus South Africa, and I remember when that got read out, I was sort of walking to the announcement, and I was counting in my head. I was thinking about obviously England were playing South Africa, so that took Wayne Barnes out, that took Jaco Paper out. Arguably our best referees still currently, but back then as well. And then Nigel Owens, I think, was injured at the time, so he was out. So It left Jerome Garcia's, a few French referees, and sort of myself. And I thought, wow, like I could be an outside running, I could be an outside chance here to be running touch in the final of the World Cup, which would never have even thought that would be possible, obviously, because I, wanted the All Blacks to be there. But since they weren't there, and they read my name out, and it was bizarre. It was it was incredibly special. And then being part of the game, I remember in the lead up, so normally assistant referees has to go and knock on one of the team's door, and I was doing the Springboks, but being a final, the managers were all over it, so I just got to wait sort of in the corner, right down the end of the tunnel by their changing room, and you could just hear them in the room. They were chanting, getting ready to go. I could hear the atmosphere from outside. I was underground, but up the top, and then when we walked out to all the fireworks and the atmosphere, it was unbelievable. It was an experience I'll never forget, and I think that moment made me really satisfied, and my experience at the World Cup and how I refereed, it made me really satisfied with sort of what I'd been able to achieve up to that point. So it was a really memorable part of my career, which was pretty special for me.
You mentioned the scrutiny of particularly being a professional referee. How do you deal with all the media, particularly social media, and the negative posts that you try and avoid seeing? Yeah,
look, I literally just don't look at it anymore. It's probably the only way to be able to do it. I think people ask me, when we talk about my first Super game, what was the difference between that and club rugby and test matches? What's the difference between that and Super? And like, arguably, yes, the game is a little bit quicker for sure. Players are more accurate, they're fitter, so it goes for 80 minutes. It's a full 80 minutes, especially with the reserves that come on. But the biggest difference is the media attention, the social media, especially over the last decade. That the access that people have to comment on a game, contact you personally, and they're not contacting you to say nice things. Really, I mean, it's interesting. I do get a lot of like positive feedback, which I do read, and I do thank people when they do that, because it does mean a lot. But like a lot of the negative stuff that comes to me personally through Facebook or Instagram, or even on online comments or media articles, I just don't read, because what I've worked out is that I used to read a lot of that, and it actually really affects you mentally. Gets you pretty down. You think that, well, even though it's only 3 or 4 people out of the 60,000 people that watched it, well, they must be right. Sometimes they are right. No, sometimes you have a bad game. You work that out in your own review and through your coaches and stuff. So that's been the hardest. It's never easy. Sometimes you do see some stuff, and I think So what I do is I just don't look at it, but also sometimes when I do look at it, I share it with other referees, and they show me the same messages that they're getting from different people as well. So we have a good laugh about it. So that's sort of how I deal with it now, and luckily have been doing it for a long time, so seen enough anyway that you're more used to it. But I think for new referees, it's always going to be a challenge just to be able to get to that point, because it just takes a bit of time. But we're all just human, so it's pretty natural just to react like we do to it anyway. So not always easy.
Yeah, not always easy. We're all humans at the end of the day. And of course, a lot of law variations in our game. There's a lot of ones that have been trialled this year. Are you a fan of some of them, or would you like to change them further?
Yeah, look, I am a fan of all of them. Like I just get told what to do. I like the challenge of having to the 50-22 law came in. You have to really change your process around seeing it as an AR or seeing it as a referee. Also like they get if that's a good kick, they get an attacking line out, and teams are on the attack and potentially get more tries. I really like the goal line dropout. I think it rewards the team that gets close to scoring, but the defense are good enough to hold them up, or they knock it on, or it goes touch and goal. So mainly because I just like how for me, I just see it as progression of the game. The game's constantly looking to ways to improve and get better, and make it more enjoyable for spectators. And like, we don't always get it right. But I think as the changes are happening, they're happening for good reason. And we're the referees, so we just sort of down the line, and we'll just do what we're told. And I don't mind doing that either.
50-22, that's a difficult one. I've noticed that even as a commentator, sometimes all of a sudden go, oh gee, bloody hell, it's a 50-22. So definitely the mindset of getting used to some of these rules, it takes a while. Of course, also, what's the toughest game of rugby you've refereed at any level?
Look, I think actually the game a few weeks ago in Sydney, the Springboks versus Australia, that was pretty tough. Wouldn't be the toughest. Like I think the toughest would have been those World Cup games, the Springboks and Irish Lions games. But it was tough like that week because there was history the week before. There was also there were a lot of situations in the game, and like any game, where you're constantly making a decision between like A or B. What is the best decision for this game? Because a referee, you're refereeing it pretty subjectively. You're trying to be consistent. But if you threw the book at every tackle or ruck, you'd find a penalty, and you'd find 50 penalties in the game. So you're constantly having to weigh up. Okay, what is the best decision right now? It's either do I blow my whistle, do I play advantage, or do I stand off and actually let the game continue? And there were a lot of situations in that game where I was constantly, even when I was blowing my whistle, I was thinking, okay, is it just a penalty? Do I need to reverse the penalty? When we had the all and brawl at the end, I was thinking, okay, do I do nothing? Is it just a warning? Do I still need to yellow card Bumpimpi for starting it? Do I actually need to yellow card even Etzebeth and Alan Alatoa? All these things are going through your mind as you're going through it. And because there were so many of those occasions where, not that you've ever 50-50, but you're going, okay, I'm 100% on this is what I think is the best decision. But when you finish the game and you then go through your review with your reviewer, it's very easy for them to go and say, well, actually, you chose B. We think A was the actual best decision, and then all of a sudden, it can be perceived as a poor performance. So mentally, I was actually, I was working pretty hard in that game just to constantly just keep juggling everything. But fortunately, I was supported with how I handled that game and and got a lot of good feedback. So it was hard, but I think a lot of the experience, what that helps you is that it helps you decide, okay, which is that best decision that you need to make. So that's why someone like Wayne Barnes is definitely one of the best in the world, because through experience he will often make that right decision when there's actually multiple decisions that any given referee can make at one time.
Do you think that as the game's evolved in the last decade, that man management in particular, using your voice a lot more has evolved? Is there more emphasis on more of a presence?
Yeah, I think managing 2 international test teams, yes, you can do that with your whistle, but also a lot of it is actually what you do behind the scenes. So I was actually given some really good feedback from Neil Sorensen once, and so in a game of rugby you have about 35 minutes ball and play time. Okay, so that's 35 minutes when the actual ball's been thrown around out of an 80-minute game. So ask yourself, okay, for the next 45 minutes of downtime or stoppages or resets of scrums, what are you actually doing as a referee? And it really challenged me to think, well, actually, I can be using that time to be working harder, to be managing players, to be managing captains, to be talking with certain individuals about things that I'm seeing, talking with my assistant referees, talking with my TMOs, working as a team. So I think that management, that man management, that presence, obviously getting the big decisions right, the other key thing as well, is a big part of the game now. And a big part of Nigel Owens was probably just he was world class at it. And we're not always technically correct in terms of the decisions that we give. I would definitely put my hand up to that. I'm sure Nigel would as well. But what Nigel was excellent at was that whatever decision he made, he explained it really well. The people understood him, they trusted him, and he was able to manage players on the field, in the game, and also at downtime really well. So I think it is a big part of the game at this stage.
Lyndon Bray and Chris Pollock said a number of years ago that they found it actually harder dropping back down to club rugby coming from professional rugby. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. So I always try and referee one club game a year. Often, so between February to November, I've got rugby on every weekend, and if I'm not refereeing, I'm the assistant referee. So that often means I'm traveling on a Friday or a Saturday, so I can never really get to do any club rugby. But often there's the opportunity, maybe one weekend a year when I can. And when I refereed out of Wellington, obviously I normally try to do at least one club game a year. I refereed out of Auckland, did the same thing up there. And then this year in Horowhenua Kapiti, I was able to referee a club game up here. And it just so happened that it occurred because I refereed a Super Rugby game on the Friday, came back on the Saturday, and then went to Shannon and refereed Shannon versus Waikanae Beach. So, I contacted the union and said, look, I'm going to be available this weekend because I wasn't sure, what other Saturday I might be free in the future. So it was an amazing day, actually really, quality rugby. few beers afterwards, few curried sausages, a few speeches. And that's what I loved about rugby. That's what I missed about club rugby when I started in Dunedin. But yeah, it's I feel a lot of pressure when I do club rugby because the game is still a game of rugby. I think it's actually harder to referee because the players aren't as they're not professionals, so they don't train professionally. So potentially they're less accurate. So less accuracy means that there's more pictures that you're seeing. There's more decisions that you're having to balance between. And the level I'm refereeing now, I turn up to a club game and people sort of say, well, that's that Super Rugby referee, that's that Test match referee. So they expect a level higher than probably what they used to. So yeah, I feel a lot of pressure and probably more so than when I'm doing a Super game.
So you've got an NPC game this weekend, and are you in line for any internationals in the November window?
So I do. I've got Otago versus Waikato this weekend, and then 3 more weeks of NPC before playoffs. And every year there's 4 international windows. So there's 6 Nations, the July series, Rugby Championship, and the November or the Autumn Internationals up north. So as a referee, if you're sort of in that top sort of 20 referees in the world, you're selected in those windows 4 games, and they'll select you for a Tier 1 game, which is a Tier 1 nation versus Tier 1, or a Tier 2 game. And depending on how you referee the window previous is what game you'll get in November. So I refereed 6 Nations at the start of the year. I refereed Scotland versus England in the Calcutta Cup. So they were happy with my performance there. So then I got an appointment in July, which was Argentina versus Scotland again. They were happy with my performance then, so they gave me a Rugby Championship game. So we always find out 6 weeks before the game that we're doing whether we're selected or not. So after the Rugby Championship, our bosses and reviewers, which is Joel Jute, Bryce Lawrence from New Zealand, Tony Spreadbury, Craig Jubir, and Stu Berry, they'll sit down, they'll look at all the appointments for the games in November, and they'll create a matrix of referees and go, okay, look, this is a game that these referees will do. So depending on how they thought I referee in the Rugby Championship and how everyone else referees, they'll potentially give me an appointment in November. So it's always pretty much how you referee the window before, and that's how the World Cup will be selected as well. So if I get a 6 Nations game at the start of next year, after that 6 Nations, that's when they're going to select their 12 or so referees that are going to be in the middle at the World Cup. So that'll be a definite goal. So I'm sort of 2 games away potentially of Test matches. If I can referee those well and then referee domestically well, because you've still got to referee well in NPC and Super Rugby, then I'll hopefully I might be selected for another World Cup.
And the World Cup in France next year, that will definitely be a massive tournament, and also not as a referee, but there's a lot of teams within the next 12 months that could win that tournament.
Look, I think, Brad, the number of teams, maybe at the last tournament, let's say realistically in 2019, maybe like the quarters, were pretty much everyone knew who was going to be in the quarters.
Yeah.
But at this next World Cup, I think there could be, 9 or 10 teams that could be in that, especially with obviously all the Tier 1 teams and how accurate and how good they are right now.
Yeah.
We're seeing in the Rugby Championship, we're seeing in July. So in the July window, the 3rd weekend, it was 1-1 for I think almost every series. So that just shows that. And then Rugby Championship now, like everyone's pretty much on the same points, having won and lost to each other. So, if you're off by 2% now, that's the game lost. Where I think, it was almost a given 5 years ago, the All Blacks would just win games. And, that's good. And I don't think it's not a decline in how the All Blacks are playing. The All Blacks are still, I believe, the best team and the best players in the world. But everyone else is as good as us now as well, getting better.
Getting better.
People are well coached, well resourced. They play in top competitions around the world, so the competition's fierce. And with World Rugby changing the eligibility criteria for some of the, for any other team now. So if you played for the All Blacks, it doesn't mean that you can qualify to play for Samoa or Tonga or any other country that you may be eligible for. So it will strengthen those other teams that potentially didn't have those top players. It's going to be the most competitive World Cup I think we've anyone's ever seen.
Well, Ben, it's been fantastic having you on the Huddy Hui again, and all the best this weekend and for the rest of the year with your rugby refereeing. Thanks, Brad. Lovely to talk to you and be on the Hui as well tonight. And thanks, mate, and all the best. Awesome. Many thanks to Ben O'Keefe as our guest tonight. We'll be back on tomorrow night as well. We'll be reviewing St. Pat Silverstream's first 15 season, as they just narrowly fell short of the national top 4. So tune in tomorrow at 9 p.m. That's the Huddy Hui for tonight.